Hi, Andrea here. I hope you're doing well. In all my videos, I keep referring to insulin and insulin resistance. So today I want to give you a quick tip on how to measure it, how to measure your insulin resistance. Now, obviously, big disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician, so please work with your doctor on these issues. Also, if you enjoy my videos, please like them on YouTube, subscribe to my channel, share it with friends or family members that need help with fat loss, and leave me a comment. If you have any questions, if you have suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment. All right, how to measure insulin resistance. So let's quickly recap, super quick recap of insulin and insulin resistance. Insulin is the hormone produced by our pancreas in response to elevated blood glucose. So every time your blood glucose rises, your insulin comes in the bloodstream, gets the excess glucose and distributes it to all the cells in the body. And that glucose can be used by the cells, by the mitochondria in your cells, to produce ATP, which is the energy currency of our body. If there is excess glucose, then it can get stored into glycogen, which is the glucose storage mechanism in our body, in our muscles and in our liver. And if there is more excess, that will be converted to fat through de novo lipogenesis. Insulin resistance happens when you have chronic elevated insulin levels, also known as hyperinsulinemia. And that happens when you are exposed to chronically elevated levels of glucose because you're ingesting a lot of glucose. The more time your cells are exposed to elevated levels of insulin, the more they become resistant to the signal of insulin. And so they stop accepting insulin, which then gives the wrong message to the pancreas, which thinks that the cells are not getting the glucose and so produces more insulin, thus more elevated insulin. Another pathway that exacerbates the insulin resistance is the accumulation of fat in the liver due to fructose or alcohol also. Now, the problem with insulin is that when you have elevated levels of insulin, your body is in fat storage mode, or in general in storage mode. You cannot access your fat storage for energy. So everything you eat gets converted and stored as fat if it's not used as energy. And if you're insulin resistant, then your insulin is always high and it takes a long time for that insulin to come down. The result is you are always with high levels of insulin, which means that you are always, perpetually, all your life, from when you wake up to when you go to bed, and even when you sleep, you are always in storage mode. There is basically no time in which your body can access your fat. And it gets to a point where your insulin cannot bring down your blood glucose anymore. So it cannot keep your blood glucose below a certain level, which we need. At that point, you are basically diabetic type 2. Okay, so this was a quick recap, not very quick, but the quickest I could do. So how do you measure it? Because today you don't even know probably what is it. You never heard about, apart from my videos, you probably never heard about insulin and insulin resistance. So when you go and do your blood work, usually they don't measure for insulin. Okay, so a great thing you could do regardless of your weight loss journey, even if you're on a modern diet or you're doing fasting, whatever, from now on, every time you do blood work, you ask your doctor to measure fasting insulin together with glucose. So usually blood work has fasting glucose, so make sure you have that already. In addition to that, you have to ask explicitly for fasting insulin. Once you get those two measures, so fasting glucose and fasting insulin, then there are calculators on the internet where you can plug in those two numbers and get a number. The number is called HOMA-IR. So it's just an index, and there are some ranges. So if you get a score below 1.5, optimally around 1, you are insulin sensitive. In other words, you are not insulin resistant. So your insulin is working perfectly. It can manage the blood glucose. So if you If blood glucose rises, insulin comes in, brings it down, and it's all good. If it's above 1.5 to 2, you start having some levels of insulin resistance. Above 2, it starts becoming a problem. And I think above 2.5 or something like that, then you are really severely insulin resistant, going towards diabetes type 2. So why is blood glucose not enough? Because usually they measure blood glucose and probably hemoglobin A1C to see how your blood glucose is doing. So the problem with that measure is that it's not enough. It's not enough because in the presence of insulin, you always have optimal or close to optimal levels of blood glucose, especially fasting glucose, because your insulin will bring the glucose down, and you will catch the problem with high blood glucose too late. So knowing your levels of fasting insulin and calculating the insulin resistance, the HOMA-IR index, is very useful to understand if that blood glucose is low because you're normal, or it's low because you have skyrocket high levels of insulin that it's keeping it low. An alternative way is you find a lab. For example, here in the US, I do my blood work at LabCorp, and they have developed their own index of insulin resistance. So in addition to asking for fasting blood glucose and fasting insulin, you can actually take a test that is called NMR lipoprofile with insulin resistance that will give also their index. It's a different index, they have developed it. So if you do that, you will have two markers, the HOMA-IR and the lab specific index. So getting that measure is a great way to measure your progress, especially if you are embarking in a weight loss journey, for example, with my framework or whatever, intermittent fasting or any weight loss journey. You should actually measure your insulin resistance and how that index changes over time, if you are affecting that or not. And for example, if you are still in a diet mentality, so a low calorie, low fat, restrictive kind of diet mentality, then have that index at the beginning. I would say it's very important, because if you are insulin resistant, if your insulin is high, you should not go into that diet. You should absolutely not go into a low calorie, low fat, restrictive diet, because your levels of insulin are high, you are insulin resistant. You don't want to start restricting at that point, because your body is not ready. It will not be able to access your fat, and that insulin will take a while to go down. And if you keep ingesting foods that elevate your blood glucose and insulin, even if you are in a calorie deficit, then you will keep around that problem for a long time. And in that period of diet, you will lose a lot of muscle mass and not fat, because you cannot access it due to your insulin. Okay. Now, a simple way to know if you're insulin resistant is that looking at yourself. If you have a gut, so if you have fat, both subcutaneous fat and visceral fat, chances are you are insulin resistant. And if you see that it's very difficult for you to lose weight and you keep packing up weight year after year, you are insulin resistant. If you are very big, you are probably severely insulin resistant. So you don't need the test to know. But the test will give you a number. And if you start doing the right things, then you can track that number and you can understand if you are affecting the issue, the real issue, or not. All right, I hope this was useful and actionable. If you're still stuck, if you don't know where to start, if you're still all confused and too difficult, if you cannot implement it on your own, please contact me and I can help you out. All right? I hope to hear from you soon. Bye.